IMF. A very different atmosphere, if you've been reporting all week, to 6 months ago when a different chancellor was forced to return home early. And as much as we could focus in on the minor changes to the forecast, the bigger change is that significant one compared to 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think that is right. I mean, what's interesting, it's quite unusual to get that kind of access to see some of those private meetings, because that was a private meeting between the Chancellor and the head of the International Monetary Fund. And the background to it is, yes, it's certainly right that the UK is in a significantly better place than it was previously. I mean, this time in the last meetings, which was 6 months ago, by now, Kwasi Kwarteng had come back from the meetings to the UK and had already been sacked on the Friday of the meeting. So there's a Friday of the spring meeting. We're talking about the meeting back in October. Things obviously have gone better for Jeremy Hunt here. He's still here. He's still Chancellor. That's a good start. But looking at the state of the economy, the IMF does think that the UK is going to be the weakest growing economy in the G7. And that's what comes back to those words from Jeremy Hunt. He wants to prove the fund wrong, and it's all about the fact that there is a bit of a difference now between what the UK thinks. They think, Chancellor thinks we're doing okay, and the fund, which thinks the UK is particularly badly hit by many of the issues we've seen recently. It's not that we're the only place that's facing a cost of living crisis, or indeed any of the other issues with weak growth and problems with debt. It's just that the IMF thinks it's a little bit worse in the UK. And then on top of that, you have strikes. And obviously, you've just heard Jeremy Hunt's reaction to what's happened with that latest vote. It's hard. I mean, reading between the lines, is there a sign there that he's ready to renegotiate? No, right now it sounds like he's more keen to try and urge those who have yet to vote for this, and there are still some unions who have yet to vote for it and have those results, to go for it. And it looks like that kind of difference between the unions and government is going to continue for quite some time, until we certainly get all of the results from all of the unions. But as I say, the UK is not the only country in the world to face problems with its unions and with strikes at the moment. The UK is not the only country in the world to face problems with weak growth right now. But as far as this place is concerned, here where they look at countries all around the world and give an assessment of just how well or badly they think they're doing, they just think the UK, whether because of Brexit, whether because of other factors, whether because of what's going on with the economy right now, the green transition, it thinks that if you add up everything up, as a result of that, the UK is just that little bit weaker than everywhere else. And that's something the Chancellor is not comfortable with at all.
Ed, I'm interested as well on what you've been picking up in terms of the conversations around the banking sectors in all countries, but obviously the UK in particular, because it's probably an area over the last couple of months where there's been less bad news for the UK banks than in continental Europe, particularly Switzerland, as we know, or in the US, which, until a few months ago was thought to have probably the strongest banking system, and some cracks have been revealed in it. There have been some hints, some headlines coming out that the UK might be looking as well at boosting that deposit guarantee that's lower in the UK than it is in the US. What have been some of the kind of conversation points you've been picking up on?
Yeah, there's quite a lot on banking here, as I guess wouldn't be a surprise given what happened with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in the US, a big, well, within the tech sector at least, a big bank, pretty small by the standards of US banks, which caused certainly a lot of worries around the American banking system, and a few other smaller banks collapsed as well. And then on top of that, the Swiss investment bank, Credit Suisse, having to be forcibly bought by UBS. As a result, I think the financial analysis, so this is a place which looks at the state of the economy, so how much economic growth is happening, what's happening gross domestic products, are we all getting better off, all that stuff. But at the same time, they're looking at the plumbing underneath, and they are definitely concerned that what those episodes showed is there is some vulnerability. When you've got interest rates going up, and they're going up around the world, then banks tend to feel the strain, and that's happening right now. And it's in that light, I suppose, that places like the Bank of England are looking at just how much protection depositors have against something going wrong in the future. That's what deposit insurance is. It means that if you put your money into a bank with a banking licence, it is guaranteed, it is insured up to £85,000. But here's the thing, that's not really being fully tested yet. And because Silicon Valley Bank, the UK bit of it, was bought out by HSBC, we didn't get to see if that system was going to work. And a lot of people think £85,000 is quite low compared with what they've got in the US here, $250,000. So might that go up? So that's certainly been one of the big things that's starting to, the conversation conversations starting to happen here. Another one that's just worth mentioning is normally at the end of these meetings, you get the IMFC, the kind of council of the IMF, all of the big countries, and the G20 come up with what they call a communique, so a kind of a shared set of agreements about what they've talked about. It's a big summit here. They need to talk about things and they need to agree on things. But because Russia is part of both of those fora, it's basically saying no to everything. And so neither the IMFC have been able to issue a full communique on the economy, or the G20 have. And it's interesting because here you have a moment where an institution here, like the IMF is kind of like the UN. It's one of these big bodies that relies on the world having some unity. They're having some trouble, and they're having trouble in a way that a lot of people are quite concerned about, because they think, is this the end of the kind of globalised world as we know it? Is this what Kristalina Georgieva, who you saw just at the start of when we were talking, the head of the IMF, says could be the beginning of a new Cold War? So those are the really worrying things going on beneath the surface. Those are the things that are unnerving people, on top of what's going on with the banking sector and what's happening with the economy. So some nerves. I say it's not the end of the world, the stuff that's going on here right now. The economy isn't in a terrible place, but there's just enough of these kind of scary noises that people are quite unnerved.
And Ed, we'll get more of your Jeremy Hunt interview later today.